This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now
got a
be
gavel.
recorded.
Are you okay, Sherry? You sure?
No, I did it because I didn't know how y'all felt.
We're recording.
See how cute?
All right, I call the Surfside Beach Planning Commission meeting for May 4th, 2021 to order. And we'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
These chairs are old bastard.
Yeah. Hold on, you'll be across the room. All right, the first item is agenda approval. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second?
I second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. Now, minutes approval of the March 2nd, 2021 meeting. Need a motion for that. Those are the ones that are attached. We'll do motion and second and then discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll move to approve.
Okay. Second? Second on the
I
minutes?
second it.
Okay. Now, it sounds like there was some discussion.
So, and this was my fault. We probably need to add that we did not approve the minutes for the November meeting because I was going to talk to
Right.
Sherry about that, which I have not done.
Okay.
Which
Yeah.
is
I remember that.
absolutely still my fault.
So we need to note
She's
that
been more than available. That was not her. It was all me.
we need to note on the minutes then, Sherry,
We
that
probably need
the
to make that note, I
approval was
guess.
deferred on that. Yeah.
And I assume we cannot approve them now because
They're not in
we're
front of
not
us.
in the,
Yeah.
right, so we,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
we'll do that the next time.
That would be an agenda change, unfortunately.
Right.
All right. Now we.
I had a question. You were going to look into the why R2 had a different pitch on roof pitches than the other two.
It
areas.
appears that it was part of the ordinance changes and it was removed from every other section and it was inadvertently left there. So I think it's a Scrivener's error
Okay.
from everything that I found during when those changes were going through before. So when we go through, if we do make any changes at this point, then I would recommend that we add that as another amendment. But we can amend it at any time as a Scrivener's error.
Okay, so at this point, we have, the first change would be to indicate that the minutes approval of November 9th was deferred. And then let's find down here the place where,
It's on page 2.
page 2.
1, 2, 3 paragraphs down.
The roof pitch, Ms. Coleman spoke.
Yeah.
We need to annotate that somehow, that Ms. Coleman later said that was a Scrivener's error.
It was not intended to be left in the draft that went to be, that was approved.
Okay, and while we're there, just above that, propane tanks, blah, 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 people are burying them.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a typo. Does anybody have any other?
I just have one question. On the second page where it says Ms. Abram, the third section down where it says Ms. Abrams stated that we needed to pay attention to our zones, blah, blah, blah. R1 and R2 districts. R3 has large lots.
R1 has large. Oh, I know. Or is that?
What were we?
I think that was when we were talking about splitting the lots.
I was afraid that people in and I meant R1.
Yeah.
I did mean R1.
I think it was supposed to be R1.
I may have misspoken, but I meant R1.
Because we were talking about the ones that had enough square footage
Yeah.
That's
to
not
be.
what we were talking about in this
Okay.
case, I don't think.
Well, what I was worried about was that somebody like my property could decide to put their propane tank in the setback,
Yeah.
which is totally unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
I was just questioning where it said R3 has
Well, the
large lots. I was just.
Well, I meant R1.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing that would change that is if I don't think that anyone.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant R3.
I don't
Excuse
think that anyone installing a tank would run a line any further than they had to.
Yeah.
But
My question was
That's
just
theoretical.
about that it said R3 has large lots.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just wondering
And it
if
should have
that
been
was
R1.
correct as to what she had said or not.
Yeah, R1 has large lots.
But we approved that they could put them in the setback?
Well, we,
Because
what we
I,
were talking about that night, was that there's so many things that we don't identify that they just assume you can't put in the setback, and specifically HVAC units are not allowed. And so other things, like, one thing from experience, I'll tell you last night, HVAC units, one of the things we're starting to see a lot more are generators. And people are buying generators. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. So the things that we're having problems with on some of the smaller lots especially are, we got HVAC units, generators, and propane tanks. So in many zoning ordinances, you can encroach with those into the setbacks. Doesn't mean it's fully in the setback, but it doesn't have to be completely out of the setback. So when you have a challenging side yard, you might be able to fit it in there if you can get a little wiggle room.
To be specific, Bill, this was a discussion. It was not.
Right, it was just discussion. But the issue that made me bring it up was we did have a gentleman that buried propane tanks.
without a permit.
Right.
Mhm.
Because he wanted to put it against the wall, and we said you can't put them in the setback. And so,
All right, are there any other edits to the minutes of March 2?
So I think Sherry was confused about what she's supposed to put there because she said it just transcribes what was said. I'm just trying to help her out a little bit.
I'm where I said R3 and I meant, you can, maybe best to leave it then. I don't want you, we're not going to rewrite history.
yeah, we know what, you got it?
I know what I said. I know, I'm perfectly, I've got an earring on the floor.
It's a beautiful year.
Yeah, I have no problem with leaving it that way. I misspoke. Can you change it? But like with a note saying that,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, I'm amending it now because I misspoke. I meant R1.
Mhm.
Will that work? Yeah. I didn't want to do anything funny. Anybody have anything else before we vote on approval of the minutes? All in favor of the minutes as edited, say aye.
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 Okay. Now we come to public comments on agenda items. Mr. Public? Nothing to say. How about that?
Now we're in trouble.
All right, none. Discussion items, tree ordinance, the floor is yours, Carol.
Okay, I'll go over it again. You've heard some of this before. We talked about it a little before, but the impetus behind bringing this to you came from staff. They say that there's some inconsistencies in here, that there are some things that people complain about, and I'm sure one of them is being able to cut limbs without a permit. But anyway, so one of the staff members took a crack at, no pun intended, at writing a new ordinance, and that's what's labeled, that's what I put in here, that is the draft. I thought I had it labeled as draft, I'm not sure. But,
Yes.
so that's the draft, but as I put in the little report, I did get it on there.
Starts with tree protection?
Yes.
Yes, but it doesn't say draft, right?
No, and the watermark should be on the page.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. The one I've got, I printed out before I put the watermark on, so. But anyway, the intent was not to stir something up. I know that the whole ordinance was rewritten. I went back and looked at some of that in 2017. So I know that there was a lot of work and a lot of effort that went into creating what's on the books now. If I go back through here and I do find things that are obviously in conflict with each other, I can give you that. But I just wanted to give these out to you and let you read these and just see from your standpoint if you think any amendments are necessary. Like I said, I fully understand that people are pretty satisfied with the way it turned out, and I know a lot went into it. So to get ready for this evening, I went basically to almost every coastal municipal site and looked up their zoning ordinances and went specifically to tree ordinances and landscape ordinances to see what the differences were. So this would have been a PowerPoint if we were PowerPointable tonight. So instead I had printed it out. Do you want to see a copy? So the first page is a friend of mine sent from Charleston. This is Bob Ariel, is a political cartoonist. He's really good. And this was in the paper, I think, last month or something in April. And I thought, well, this is timely. So
It's sad.
yeah. So the first page after that, labeled Municipal Comparisons for Tree Preservation Ordinances. This is not all of the ordinances I looked at, but I was just trying to create tables for comparison. The first thing you'll note is that you have a lot of different terminology that run through these ordinances. So significant trees, grand trees, specimen trees, protected trees, and landmark trees mean different things in different places. Those numbers that you see under Surfside Beach where it says 12 to 24 inches at 2 feet, that means if the tree is 12 to 24 inches around, depending on the type of tree, at 2 feet, which is literally at 2 feet above grade, then it's a specimen tree. The protected trees are basically the same list of trees at 4 to 8 inches at the same measurement. And a landmark tree is anything that's above 24 inches at the same measurement level. Now, if you drop down the next one, Seabrook Island, the only thing they had identified on theirs that I could put on here was they consider a grand tree anything larger than 12 inches diameter at breast height. So that's 4.5 feet. And you can see, I think I've got down at the bottom, when I say DBH, that's diameter at breast height. And it's the same everywhere. The measurement from finished grade for Surfside is the only ordinance I saw that was measured that way. So I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I don't think it really changes that much because trees don't tend to have that much of a change between the 2.5 feet, unless it's a cypress or unless it's an oak or a live oak that has basically multiple trees coming out of it, because those aren't really limbs in many cases. They're trees that just grew together.
I don't recall why we left off DBH and went to measure 2 to 4 inches.
Pardon?
I don't remember why we did that. We used to be DBH.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was, and I might try to figure that out, but that's the only inconsistency between the other ordinances, to be honest.
Well, I've got one across the street at 4.5 feet. You would have 3 different trees.
Right.
Whereas at the base at 2 feet, you got one huge tree.
Yeah. And that's what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
So that's the only change. The only changes on a lot of live oaks, they will move out. But in those cases, in the other municipalities, because they have the same issues, they measure each one of those. So it still comes into play.
I've got all the old minutes from 3 years ago printed out, so I may be able to find it pretty quickly.
Printed out.
That's
You
great.
Store all of that.
I was just going back over how we got to where we are before we start tinkering.
But you can see there's some variation, but they're pretty consistent in the measurements. Some places are more conservative in the numbers that they put down. But again, and I've done different pages for some of the different municipalities, so you can see why they call one a significant tree or why what is a protected tree. I've got some of the definitions in here also. If you drop down to Conway, where I live, is very conservative. You can see that their protected trees are basically anything between 4 and 14 inches DBH, and then all the landmark trees, the ones you can't really touch, are all that are mapped, which there's a book that was written a long time ago. And then anything over 30 inches, and then there was one more thing that they added to their ordinance, anything that could be designated by city council. So if there's a historic reason why, because there are a lot of trees, and the reason they started saving them in Conway was because there were famous people associated with them. Like, it's kind of like the stump meeting out at Gallivan's Ferry.
Okay.
When people know what it is. So George Washington was at this tree. not saying that's true, but if there's some historical significance to the tree, then you want to keep it there.
So help me understand, in Conway, any tree 4 inches to 14 inches is protected?
Is protected. Doesn't mean, and you'll see it on the page for Conway, doesn't mean you can't cut it. It just means basically you have to get permission. And
Wow.
I can send this out. I found this happened to come up too. This is an article from about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, that was in the Post and Courier, where someone moved into downtown Conway and cut a tree, but they didn't get permission. And they didn't know they had to get permission because it wasn't, I mean, they weren't trying to cut down a live oak, but and so you can see where that might cause a problem. But anyway, but like I said, they're exceptionally conservative. Probably the strictest, one of the strictest tree ordinances in the state, other than Conway. Georgetown is very strict, but it's got a big historic district. And then Somerville is uncanny because they protect the pine trees also. And what happened was a couple hundred years ago when the timber industry, when they were coming in and cutting trees for turpentine production and lumber and everything else, people got tired of them coming in and cutting the trees, even though they were replanting them. And it's a problem now because, you know, pine trees are difficult to manage during storms. And so I know a number of people that live in Surfside, I mean in Somerville, that have had to get permission to cut pine trees so that in hurricane season they wouldn't fall on their homes. And it's a battle, but that's what they want. So is what it is. So the other thing I put on here, and you'll see this again under Beaufort. Oh yeah, in Beaufort, palm trees that are greater than 18 feet.
Are you on page 4?
No, I'm still on the same page.
Oh.
I'm at the bottom of the page. Palm trees greater than 18 feet or 36 feet tall. So that's something that you'll see again in a minute too. So municipal comparisons for landscape, for residential, this is where there's a big difference. Most of the ordinances I found didn't have requirements for a typical single family lot that wasn't part of some sort of a development. So if you had a piece of property, we'll use Conway as an example. If you had a vacant lot in Conway and there were trees on there, you'd have to do a tree survey. If any of those trees met any of these standards to trigger it, then you could take trees down so long as you got permission, or, you know, I'm trying to think the best way to say it. As long as you didn't just clear cut it. But they didn't have requirements for necessarily, unless you were replacing something that you had to get permission to take out, if they had a replacement schedule. So if you took out a 10-inch oak tree because it was right where you want to build your house or something along those lines, you might have to replant a couple of smaller oak trees or something else on your lot that qualified. But it doesn't specifically say you have to have 5 trees of 3-inch caliper, period. So that's unusual. So Surfside's one of the only ones that has that specified. And I went through their landscaping. Most of them exempt single family lots from the requirements right up front. And if you look, if you want to, I can send them out to you and you can see that. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. So the first thing on this page, municipal comparisons, I've got Surfside R1, minimum landscape area on the lot is 50%, and you're required to have five trees per lot, minimum of 3-inch caliper, or 3-inch diameter at breast height, or at 2 feet. That's what it is. And so R2, the minimum landscape area drops down because lots can be smaller, and you still have to have 5 trees. And then R3, it drops down even further to 20% for the landscape area, and you have to have 3 trees of 3 inches. Now, when I talked with the chairman, he said, when you think about that, 5 trees per lot at 3 inches, that's only 15 inches of tree. That's assuming that your lot is completely clear cut. So what you hope for is that you're not dealing with a lot where there was nothing there. Not like Grand Dunes was in Myrtle Beach when the company that went in and has built all the houses that are there now went and literally did clear cut all the pines. You know, they saved what they had to, but they're planting some back. But I'm amazed at how many people don't want trees on their lot. Now, one thing we discussed and something that we probably could add is that on the ocean front, and you'll see it again down here, I'll show you in just a minute. In fact, it's on the bottom of this page. If you're within a certain amount of distance from the ocean, you're going to have a hard time getting a tree to survive and thrive. So you may want to consider adding language that you can use palmettos or palms or something that has a better chance of surviving. But maybe since you have a requirement of 3 trees per lot, that if you choose to do palmettos, then you have to have 4 or something along those lines. The thing at the bottom of the page I got from Seabrook Island, I think it was. Yeah. That is not applicable within 1,000 feet of the South Carolina Coastal Council Ocean Critical Line, where palmetto trees will be substituted for shade trees. So in most areas, you have to put in oaks or different types of oaks or other types of trees, and within 1,000 feet of the Ocean Critical Line, then you can substitute palmettos.
Well, now, in our R3, they've been putting palmettos in place of trees because there's no room for a tree.
And see, that's part of the question. And we talked
before. They kind of grow straight down.
They do.
And so they're a better choice when you take a lot, split it in half. You only have 30 feet a lot, and you got setbacks on both sides. So there's really some of especially they put a pool in, they got a corner they could put here and a corner here, and then 2 places in the front. And that's what they've been doing. They've been using palmettos instead of.
And that's the thing. Maybe we should put it in the ordinance. I don't know why.
I thought it was in here. The ordinance because that was a big issue. Can you use palmetto trees for trees?
Yeah.
And I know these houses have been built since we changed the ordinance.
Well, I know they've been allowing it.
I thought I saw something like that too.
Maybe it is. Maybe I missed
The
it.
last 2 trees on the chart, I didn't recognize. I don't know what they are, and I meant to look them up. But
I believe they added that at the end from the one I had to this one.
Okay.
I'm looking at the existing ordinance.
yeah, how about what is a yopon and what's a zelkova?
A yopon. There's a yopon street everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a palm tree?
No.
It's not.
Mm-mm.
How about the other one? Zelkova or whatever.
What page are you on?
This is your second page of your list
Oh,
of trees.
Okay.
17,750.
Okay.
So I found the little addition.
What section is it under?
Are you asking me?
It's in staff's
You said you
edition.
found it?
I found it, yeah.
Page 16 and 17.
725.3,
Okay.
way just before 725.4. It says, except palmetto trees shall be allowed replacement. I was going to say the wording is a little odd. Except palmetto trees shall be allowed replacement trees in R2 and R3 districts.
Okay, so they are allowing them, but and I think the thing would be maybe to encourage them in some of those instances, not take out if something is thriving, and you're exactly right. My concern is when you get down to 5-foot setbacks, if you try to put something in a 5-foot setback, even if it's not a canopy type tree, I mean, like I said, a palm or palmetto will make it, but if you try to put something else there, you're going to run into trouble at some point, either with roots or
Limbs.
yeah. It's just, my neighborhood is small lots and it's a little village concept. And my neighbor across the street, when the landscaper did the house, they put magnolias on either corner of the front porch. And they lasted about 2 years before they started causing problems. And I mean, literally this far from the corner of the porch. And I'm like, have you seen what these do? I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love magnolias, best climbing tree in the world, in my opinion, if you don't strip them. But
So this says with 1,000 feet of the South Carolina Coastal Council Ocean Critical Line.
Yeah, that's on the ocean front.
Okay, so is that like the setback line? Is that, what are you
It's
talking
it's
about?
the critical line. If you look at a plat on the ocean front, there are a number of lines that are there.
Right,
So basically, the one after, if you're going towards the ocean, the one after Surfside's, because Surfside has their own, which adds a few more feet. And then you've got DHEC OCRM, Ocean Coastal Critical Line, but you can't build. It's a point at which even if
can't
though it's a
build
problem,
forward.
you can't build
Right.
forward of it. So they're saying measure from there
I think,
1,000 feet, but that would put you back probably
I was gonna say, I kind of need a visual of
two
how far
two and a
back
half
it is.
blocks.
Yeah, because
So
in some towns,
Yeah.
the street is wider.
yeah,
And the lots are bigger,
Mhm.
so it might be, the oceanfront houses or it might be the oceanfront and across the street. In our town, that might be several blocks.
yeah.
It
So
would-
that
It would be most
So-
of our, it would go out of R3.
It would.
so I'm not saying that is an example. I'm just saying they did that,
Yeah.
but Seabrook has
Your
larger
house would be
lots
in
and
1,000 feet,
Right.
Bill.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying that
Would I?
what
think
worked
so.
for them
Yeah,
may or may
exactly.
not work, just
oh, I totally agree
because
with you.
it's
I totally agree with
completely
you.
different.
I just wanted to point out that they actually identified the areas where they,
Gotcha.
and limited. And you're perfectly right in that on the R3s, on the really small lots that are challenged,
Yeah.
that's the best thing you can do. And those are pretty much at the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at the zoning map and you've got that strip and a couple of fingers that go up a little bit, but for the most part, they don't trickle back into the rest of the area of Surfside. So it's limited, but and then I put some information on here. So again, like you see minimum landscaped areas, only one other municipality had a minimum landscape area specifically, and that was Edisto, and they only had 15%, which shocked me. But they have small lots there too, so I'm thinking that's what it is. Minimum trees planted. Seabrook did have a requirement. One per 4,000 square feet. So whereas we've got five per lot in the R1 minimum is 9,000 square feet. So if you've got a 9,000 square foot lot, you're required to have 5. In Seabrook Island, you'd be required to have 2. So there's a difference. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just pointing it out. Then some of these are replacement trees. So if you have to take trees out, then that's what those numbers refer to. So if trees have to be removed, for example, in a lot of places you are allowed to move trees that are in the footprint of the house. But if it is a specified tree in any of these lists, you might be required to replace the loss of that tree somewhere on your lot.
Okay, Carol, am I correct in what I'm seeing big picture here is that Surfside is a lot more specific than most areas?
Yes.
The landscape area and the minimum trees.
Yes.
But as far as the protection of the trees themselves, we are not by far the tightest.
No.
A lot of places tighter than we are.
Yeah, and there are a lot of places that do require you to get a permit even for cutting limbs.
Yeah.
And they specify the size of the limbs and everything else. So that's what I was saying. You're not out of the realm of reality for what other people are doing. But some places don't have as much of as stringent requirements. Some places are more stringent, but this is more detailed. And like I said, they have detail in them, but most of them are referring to a subdivision. So if a developer were to come in, they're required to do all this stuff, but it's part of the subdivision plan. And in some of these, especially these island communities that are gated or whatever, they may have to do a whole lot more because Planning Commission gets to lop a whole lot more on them. Like they can say, we want to see more of this, or we want this. If we're going to give you this many lots, you're going to give us something. And you don't see that I would say negotiation, except there's not a whole lot of room for argument. But a lot of these places are kind of built out. See, some of these places like Seabrook, Kiowa, and Hilton Head were developed by developers. Now, they were smart enough to know bread and butter with those big trees and the canopy and the beauty of it. So they did some pretty smart development. I'm not saying all of it's good, but I worked at Kiowa Island 2 summers when I was in college, and it was relaxing place to go work. I mean, my dad was involved in the development at Hilton Head. So when I was a little kid, I remember going down there and seeing Charles Frazier and all the people that became famous for putting it together. But they knew the same thing. And, Hilton Head's, as far as planners go, Hilton Head's claim to fame is that they hid signs. So if you've been there, you got to know where you're going or you're not going to find it. So,
And
They're easy
Surfside
to
Beach,
keep their trees to have those things.
yeah.
Surfside Beach just grew like topsy. We didn't have a plan.
And same thing, that's the part of the sadness. Like when I found the original plan for Myrtle Beach, I was so surprised. If you've ever been up to the Granddaddy Pine Lakes Country Club, they have the original layout for the resort on the wall there, and it's really cool to see. And you can still see some of the things, like they had traffic circles on Kings Highway, and you can still see them in the footprint of Kings Highway because some of the lots are kind of rounded off, but they took them out a long time ago. So when the developers first went in there, they built Ocean Forest Hotel, which was grand, literally biggest mistake ever taking that down. But the plan for it was really impressive. And that's before anybody even dreamed about the Low Country Islands. And, from history, I could tell you, and from working in this part of the state for so long, a lot of the Low Country Islands probably never should have been developed the way they were because they were basically stolen from families who had heirs property conflicts because they didn't have clear title. Because you'd have someone that was probably a former slave that bought property and left it to their children and left it to their children and left it to their children. So by 1950, 1960, there were 300 or more people that were involved in the ownership of that property. And some unscrupulous developer came in and snatched it up from one of the family members. And the rest is history. So.
Did we take out the requirement that you have to have an arborist determine whether the tree was diseased or dying?
I know the staff member has to go out there.
Yeah.
That
But
somebody
he's not
has to check it.
They're
But
not an arborist. I've taken trees out but I had to get an arborist each time. One of them said, they require me to do stuff Stevie Wonder could do
yeah,
because the trees were literally growing across my house. And then the second time I had to get them, and I had to argue with the inspector. He said, well, there's nothing wrong with that tree. I said, are you an arborist?
yeah.
Because I already had to pay an arborist to write him a letter. And so we've taken that out of this because I don't see it anywhere in here.
Well, it does say if it's determined by a licensed surveyor or a licensed engineer that the following conditions are present. I think that there are things, I don't know if it says it has to be an arborist here. Let me get the removal of trees. Hold on.
I'm just so stunned that this is supposed to be the whole replacement ordinance that
Well,
I'm
that's-
lost. Yeah.
I'm like,
I thought
okay,
it was some tweaks.
I'll take it to him, but
If it works, great, but it's going to take me a long time to figure that out.
it's the approval of the code enforcement official common tree limbs over 8 inches in diameter. So tree limbs, I think staff can do, but I think if it's a tree, I think it has to be certified by somebody, but I don't remember it saying arborist.
Well, this goes back 2014 and the last one was 2018, which was after this was written, and I still had to have an arborist. And then I had to argue about it.
Yeah, I wonder if certain people took liberties.
Well, she was here.
Yeah, removal prior to the removal of a landmark tree, a letter from an ISA certified arborist, South Carolina registered forester, landscape architect, or engineer must be submitted. So they're requiring somebody that has some sort of certification to attest to it. I've seen this happen on a piece of property that's being developed in the city of Myrtle Beach. It was the old hospital was on the site, and the old hospital was torn down, I think in the 80s, and the site was never developed. And there were trees that were there as part of the hospital development, But then there were a lot of trees that kind of volunteered and grew up, and there were a couple of really nice oak trees, and then there was a stand of oak trees along, I guess it was Ocean Boulevard, North Ocean Boulevard there. And the developer wanted to keep the trees. That was the reason he wanted to put houses there. And it was the same developer that did a lot of the houses, single family houses, if you go in Market Common from the front gate, from Kings Highway. So the small lots with the big houses, Charleston style. And so because these were smaller lots with bigger houses, they wanted to maintain the trees on common property. And then, like I said, the whole line of them going down North Ocean Boulevard were a big kind of a screen, but they were pretty. And lo and behold, if Santee Cooper and City Myrtle Beach Public Works went in there to do some work and cut the roots on all the ones that were on the frontage, and they had to take all of those out. But the ones that they wanted to protect were there. Now, one that they did take out was a good size magnolia, but it was definitely diseased. And same thing, Stevie Wonder could have seen that. I mean, it was incredible, in incredibly bad shape, and people were complaining, but they hadn't gone out to the property to see it. And so when they brought an arborist in and a landscape architect and showed pictures, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't know it looked like that."
Now, who's the Stevie Wonder you speak of?
He's a blind
Carol,
guy.
when we finish with your excellent
Uh-huh.
PowerPoint, I think what I'd like to do, I don't know about the rest of you, is take this new draft ordinance and start at the beginning, and maybe all of us will have some comments as
Okay.
we walk through it.
That'll help.
Yeah.
So issues with various ordinances. This is what I said a minute ago. Most ordinances don't include residential lots with landscaping and tree requirements, with the exception of tree preservation. So they say what trees have to be preserved both in residential situations and in commercial situations. Some have requirements for subdivisions, but often that's the requirement that in that requirement is that they provide street trees. So some of them require what they call street trees to be within 5 feet of the right of way. Some of them have some other requirements, but they're not as stringent in most cases as the 5 per lot or the 3 per lot. Biggest variation is the point at which trees are measured, diameter at breast height as opposed to 2 feet from grade. Language varies as indicated on the tables. We have protected trees, landmark trees, specimen trees. We talked about that. Few municipalities have appointed tree boards to hear removal requests. Conway allows for city council to designate landmark trees. I think it's Sullivan's Island. Their tree board meets every month if it's necessary on the 4th Monday of the month, I believe it is. More than 2 ordinances require trees to be planted no closer to 6 feet to any structure. We talked about that. So you have a 5-foot setback. Couldn't do it. And beach communities typically allow palms and or palmettos. So this one's Isle of Palms. You can't cut or remove any tree in strict compliance with the article. No person shall cut, remove any tree without first obtaining a tree permit. So, I mean, that's ticking the boxes. Each tree planted or replaced pursuant to a tree permit shall have a minimum size of 4-inch caliper and 12 feet in height at the time of planting and be same or similar species. That I put in there because the biggest complaint I've heard when people plant trees is that they're too scrawny. That's been a complaint I've heard, especially with commercial development. So they put things out there, and the landscape architect or landscapers come in and put in this nice landscaping, and then we're not following up. And this is not just here; this is everywhere. Not following up to make sure that they keep that landscape looking good, landscaping looking good. So the key is that needs to be something that is followed up upon. So if you're making them put a little bit bigger tree in there, yes, it costs more, but there's a reason that you have to put it there because you took something out. So.
Yeah, but my experience with trees,
Mhm.
the bigger the tree is, harder to keep it alive.
Well,
So a 2 or 3 inch tree is a lot chances of, because they do a good root ball.
Mhm. Yeah.
But they do the same size root ball for a 4-inch tree,
Mhm.
and it's not enough.
Well, that's just what I'm telling you what some of the others are doing.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of maybe not the caliper. Maybe you don't have to go into caliper, but well, I guess you don't want one any taller because then you got this. Historic tree means any live oak tree having a diameter breast height of 16 inches or greater, or any tree of any other species having a diameter breast height of 24 inches or greater. So that's just an example. So you're seeing that the same type of measurements are out there. And then this is it, within 1,000 feet of South Carolina coastal line, palmetto trees will be substituted for shade trees. So that's in their ordinance verbatim. City of Myrtle Beach, their significant trees are live oaks, white oaks, eastern red cedar, southern magnolia, and bald cypress with a DBH of 4 inches or more. So they're setting the bar, really a high bar, because once you get past 4 inches, it's considered significant. Sable palmetto substitution is allowed in planted areas where trees are required or allowed. Palmettos are considered lower story trees, but may be substituted at a ratio of 3 to 1 for upper story trees. So if you were required to have a shade tree, upper story tree, if you're required to have 3 of those, you'd have to have 9 palmettos. So that's the difference. Protected trees, any sycamore or sweet gum greater than 12 inches DBH, any pine greater than 18 inches DBH, which is pretty good size, except Japanese black pine with a caliper of 2 inches or more. That shocked me.
Ooh, yeah.
I don't know that I even know what a Japanese black pine is, but I did see them in one of the ordinances, and I might have put it in here, that they considered that a native species. Then why is it called Japanese black pine?
I don't remember us ever talking about Japanese
I
black
don't think
pines.
I'd ever even heard of it.
So the landmark trees, the common names: flowering dogwood, American holly, live oak, white oak, eastern red cedar, southern magnolia, laurel oak, willow oak, bald cypress, hickory, and red maple. I lost part of a bald cypress last night in my backyard with the storm.
Wow.
Well, the tree is still standing, but the top of it's not there. It's no longer attached. City of North Myrtle Beach, they protect trees which have matured to 8 inches diameter breast height. In development other than single family, 8-inch trees must be designated on a tree survey. So that's one thing that we do with, if someone comes in with plans for a new house, they have to bring a tree survey to show what trees are there, and they identify them based on the size and based on the type of tree.
Now, that's a nice tidy way
But it
to,
looks like then they go clear cut it.
In many cases, it does look like that, but a lot of times, if it doesn't meet that threshold for being protected, then they can. So, diversity of species. This was really interesting to me. Okay, well, I got single family developments tree survey. Trees greater than 24 inches may be removed with a permit if located within the building footprint plan or approved by the planning commission. So that's like one of the ones I talked about on the south end of the state.
Less than 10 inches.
Huh? No, trees greater than 24 inches may be removed if a permit
Oh, I'm
is,
sorry.
yeah, with a permit if located within the building footprint plan. So what they're saying is you can have a 24-inch tree, which is big tree, and it can be removed with a permit if it's in your footprint or if the PC approves it.
okay.
So the PC would look at it when it comes through for approval, because when I was doing those types of things in Horry County, I would note those things. So we would try to encourage people to keep the grander trees, and many people want to because the lot is more attractive. So I never understood why people want to buy a completely cleared lot and throw a house there.
The demographics are changing.
Yes.
The newer the neighbors, the more they just like to pave the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't.
Not everybody
maintenance.
thinks like we do.
Well, less maintenance if you have to maintain your property all the, I mean, trees can be significant maintenance.
But this surprised me.
I grew up in Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods.
Mhm.
I knew all about maintenance.
The one you were quoting was any tree less than 10 inches may be cut at any time without a permit except on vacant lots. We found out we had a lot cut on Sandy Lane this week, and they were going to go out and check it because nobody got any permits. So they do, this is a good example. This was a chart that they had in North Myrtle Beach. If you have a lot within these size ranges and you remove trees, these are the replacement schedules. So if it's less than 7,000 square feet, you have to put 2 trees with a minimum of 20-inch caliber. So that'd be 2 10-inch trees. So you have to have 2 trees, but to get 20 inches, you're going to have more than 2 trees. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're putting 3-inch trees out there, then you're going to have 7 trees.
I was going to say,
So
you couldn't afford a 10-inch. Well, I don't know that you could move a 10-inch
Yeah.
tree.
So we'll go on to the next one. Sullivan's Island, we've been through some of this. Any tree greater than 6 inches at 4.5 feet is protected and requires a permit. Any tree greater than 16 inches is significant and must be approved for removal by their tree commission. Protected list: eastern red cedar, southern magnolia, live oak, laurel, or Darlington oak. First time I've ever heard it mentioned is that. Pecan, palm, cabbage, and sable palmetto. Those are all on their list. So, and they do, and Sullivan's, when you get the further south you get, you have some native, obviously the palmetto tree is our state tree. I mean, that's why, because that's what they built Fort Sumter from. So, native species, this was one of them.
Japanese black pine.
Yeah, red maple, loblolly, longleaf, Carolina poplar, white poplar, sassafras, sweet gum, sycamore, hackberry. Hackberry came in for the first time for me in McClellanville's ordinance. I had never seen it before. American holly, Japanese black pine, southern magnolia, plane tree maple, persimmon. I have one of those in my yard. Black willow, black cherry. I'm not sure about that, but buckthorn bully, Carolina laurel cherry, southern catalpa, I think is how they say it, Chickasaw plum, red bay, swamp magnolia, toothache tree, and yopine.
I didn't know there were that many trees in the world.
And you see the tree commission meets monthly. So
Jeez.
Wow.
Beaufort, I added in, Beaufort has a pretty stringent ordinance. Sorry, I'm going to look that thing up for you in a minute. They have protected species, and the minimum, just like on the table, the minimum DBH varies between 4 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches, 16 inches, depends. Flowering dogwood, you see the same ones coming back and forth again. All other species of overstory trees, except for laurel, oak, sweet gum, pecan, and other species of pines, these are never protected regardless of their size. I thought that was a little bit
Sweet gums are
bold.
messy.
And considered specimens at 24 inches diameter breast height and landmark at 36 inches diameter breast height. Each tree planted or replaced pursuant to a tree permit shall have a minimum size caliper, a 4-inch caliper, and 12 feet in height. I think that's on another one too. Historic tree means any live oak tree having a diameter breast height of 16 inches or greater, or any tree of any other species greater than 24 inches. I thought this was a good one that I put in here from Seabrook Island, tree protection and credits. So they not only pay attention to the measurement, the diameter at breast height, they also talk about the crown, which is really interesting to me. So the crown, which is the overstory, is what hangs out, 60 feet or greater. The diameter at breast height in that case would be 30 to 35 inches. If you have one of those that you save, then you're credited 6 trees. So you see how it trickles down depending on the size that you get the credit for.
Boy, they're more complicated than we even try to be.
Yeah. I'm trying to see. This is good. There shall be no impervious surface or grade change within 5 feet of a trunk of a tree when you're doing work. If any tree for which credit was given is not alive and healthy 1 year after all construction and development of the property is completed, it shall be removed and replaced with the trees that originally would have been required. So that's what that table refers to. So if a developer went in there and they saved some of the big trees and then the big trees died, oh no, we have to cut them down. Then they'd say, well, good, then you got to go back and plant all of these.
We don't have that kind of follow-up because we don't have that kind of staff.
Yeah. Approved list for Edisto Beach. There's one on here that I was going to look up, but I haven't seen it yet. Oak trees, they have live, willow, myrtle, laurel, basket, white, and southern red. Cedar trees, the southern red cedar, southern magnolia, and sweet bay magnolia. And then other trees that could be added by town council. Each tree trunk replacement must have a minimum 3-inch caliper and be at least 10 feet tall. So there's one where they did have the 10 feet. Multi-trunk trees must be at least 10 feet tall. And by that, I think they're talking about crepe myrtles and that type of thing that go out in different directions.
Wow.
Historic trees, and that, I mean, that's on a planning schedule. So, I mean,
That seems pretty tall.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I have
But if
2
you're-
crepe
if you're-
myrtles that have been there since I lived in Surfside for
Mhm.
7 years, and they're not. I don't think they're.
Well, you got to come to my house. Mine are crazy.
I love those trees, though.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Historic trees mean all trees with a diameter breast height of 24 inches or greater. They're also called protected trees in Edisto. Protected trees are those that are classified as either historic or significant, and significant trees mean all oak, cedar, and magnolia trees with a diameter breast height of 8 inches or greater. That's one I put in there because I was like, that one's in circles. That's straight out of their ordinance. So I can see where people might say that these are in circles, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we're seeing in other areas. I think one of the questions you asked when I came in here, most of these places are Tree City USAs, the ones that are actual functioning municipalities. I know I'll check on, I don't think I put QI in there, did I? I think QI is now because they actually have a local government.
When you say Tree City USA, is that a
It's a designation.
designate? Okay.
And
Is it a national thing?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and Arbor Foundation, that's why we have Arbor Day.
Okay.
You have to have a tree ordinance. The idea is, and you have to plant so many trees a year to keep it up. So Myrtle Beach, I think, has been a tree city for 25 years, for a pretty long time. Conway's been one, I think a little bit longer. But they, it's a source of pride for a lot of towns. So, but it's not necessarily that easy to get. And then, like I said, you have to make an effort to keep it.
We were very proud of it when we got it, as I recall.
Mhm.
It took some work, and it took the strict ordinance. Well,
Right.
and just the other day, the mayor made a big speech about Arbor Day and Tree City USA.
Oh, wow.
So that was about 1996 or so? 96.
I don't know if it's that long, but it's been a while.
16. That's 25 years.
Can't give you a date.
1996.
Is that
That's 25 years.
For Myrtle Beach.
Go ahead. Oh, for Myrtle Beach. For Surfside?
I don't know about how
Okay.
long it's been. I
All right.
vaguely recall it
I
would be a
kinda-
big deal, and I've been here
I
20 years.
remember, yeah.
Okay.
I feel like I remember when it happened, but I don't remember what the date was.
The Yopon is a holly.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
And I love the scientific name is Ilex vomitoria,
Oh, yuck.
probably because you shouldn't eat it.
Yeah,
But-
Elex. Yuck.
Vomitoria.
Oh, is that what?
Sorry.
All right. Thanks for that. That really helps a lot, Carol, to put us in perspective with the other towns.
But I did that because I didn't want to indicate that you're doing too much or
No, it sounds like we're not
We're
doing
not
as
over the
much as
top
some
at
others
all
are.
compared to the others.
Depends on what we're talking about.
Can we take a walk through this
sure.
staff presentation called Tree Protection?
Mhm.
And
Surfside's doing
that we may have some general questions
more than others.
to do with that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
You're in another place.
Side
We're on the tree protection proposed rewrite by staff. I have not yet got my head around this. I didn't compare it to the whole thing. I thought it was just some tweaks. Did staff give you any indication why it was they felt it was necessary to rewrite the ordinance in the first place?
Yeah, what things are what things are they seeing out in the field? What problems are they
What are they
having
running
that
into?
I think
is causing all this?
I think some of it is when the plans are coming in, and I think part of it is that people are building larger houses and larger houses. And when I first came on board and started helping, I remember asking, are you interested in writing an ordinance to limit the size of the house? Not just the footprint, but the size of the house. Because, I think they were doing it because they typically required additional parking spaces for any room that could be used for a bedroom, even though it's not labeled as a bedroom. But that doesn't seem to be stopping it. I mean, we did one recently that I think they had 16 parking spaces with the house. And the house had 4 or 5 sets of washers and dryers, at least 2 kitchens. And so this is not a house, it's a hotel.
There's
And
one like that on my street.
yeah, it's in a single family district, and some places have said, you can't have more than this many square feet, or you can't have more than this many bedrooms, or something along those lines. And I mean, I realize people are going to have probably do sleeping lofts or, have family rooms where you can have a couple of sofa beds or something along those lines. But it just seemed to me like it might be getting out of hand. So
So are they unable to enforce the tree ordinance as it is?
I don't think
Are
it's
they
a problem
trying
of
to
enforcing it. I
accommodate the
think
builders?
they're getting pushback from the builders.
Well,
That's where I think it's coming from.
too bad.
So is
And-
it just the builders, or is it homeowners who want to tear their current property down and build something new or add on to their?
I think it's more the builders, because I think if they do redevelop the property, you're going to run into the same situation. And in that case, it's going to happen because back in the day, people weren't building these big things. And when they tear down like a 60s ranch style house with a small footprint, then they want to come back in and build a duplex and basically go, stem to stern, every direction and fill up the property. And again, especially in probably R3, that it's a challenge to get 3 trees on there.
So staff is having difficulty.
Still don't really understand what the.
We should change the ordinance to accommodate the builders?
Well, and then the other thing that I truly think, because I told you when I came in earlier that I'm working with King Street right now because they've got an ordinance that's been drafted and somebody doesn't want it to go through. And my understanding is at the state level, more and more tree ordinances are being looked at because there's some lobbying group out there that's trying to get them rolled back a little bit, that people think that they're too cumbersome.
I'd probably be one of those. Just cumbersome laws. Too many. You know
But
how
you
complex this is compared to this? This is straight and to the point. And these people, all right, if it's builders, I understand, if you own a piece of property, how you have to go through all this. Okay, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. But I own this property. I've talked to numerous people, even in Surfside, and they said, you know what? These northerners, which I'm a northerner, come here and they're trying to add more and more regulations. And I just want to have my own peaceful, happy little land.
My
Well, one thing
experience is that the northerners want to tear down everything, and I'm the one that wants to keep the trees.
One thing that I'll say that I would put in the purpose, I mean, he's written some decent purpose language here, but the biggest thing that trees can do for you that is not mentioned here, not just with air quality, is stormwater.
Absolutely.
However, talking about storms, hurricanes are one of the, we get a hurricane every 2 a year. What do we get?
We haven't had
And-
one recently.
Well,
The last one that did major damage here was,
Matthew.
yeah.
right.
And it
But
was
we do have a storm coming in every year,
Yeah.
at least one.
Oh, yeah.
comes right
And
by us.
one of the biggest fears that I've had is these big, huge trees that I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how tall that thing is, but if that storm blows that down, me and my dog are dead. And I have a friend who had a tree, and Surfside would not allow him to trim it or cut it.
Mhm.
It fell on his house.
Ooh.
Thank God they survived, and but they ended up suing the town.
It can happen. I'm
It's-
surrounded
yeah.
by trees.
It can
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
happen anywhere.
And what's happening is, because more and more development, like one argument you can make in a lot of these historic situations is if the tree has been there for 200 years, it's lasted through storms, it's going to be here longer. Problem is, and the challenge is, when you build close to them, you shock them. And my concern in a lot of areas is that sometimes the developers, the builders don't take good enough care. That's why the language was in that Seabrook Island, I think, that said if you get credit for these trees and then they die, we're coming back and making you plant more. Putting them on notice that if we credit you with saving these trees and you don't take care of them, you're still gonna have to plant.
I
So-
have seen deliberate efforts to harm the
Mhm.
tree, oops, in the process of
Absolutely.
protecting it, accidentally
Mhm.
make it die.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've seen is, I planted your 3 little sticks, the town wants, And as soon as you get the CO, you go pull up the 3
Uh-huh.
sticks.
So then these laws are causing people to become criminals and kill their own trees.
Well, when we have too much crime, the answer is not to change the law, it's to get more
Well-
cops.
Well, the trees, like I said, that
Why do we have to have such stringent laws on people's own property?
Well,
It's a difference of viewpoint.
it
But
is.
what if we find a compromise and the public lands, let's start planting more trees on those?
Well, first of all, we don't have that much public land.
No,
And
but we
one
could
of the
do some more
things
of
that
right?
people love about Surfside is
it's green.
how green it is
Yeah.
and how beautiful it is.
Sure.
And you can't have, you can't have, I've heard Mary Ellen say this before, actually, that you cannot have a beautiful town with no regulations.
Mhm.
That's why you have a
Mhm.
planning
We're
board.
not saying no regulations. We keep adding,
But if you don't have some of
This
these in
area.
place,
of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
that you can't do away with all of it.
But you make it so complex, keeping it simpler, I think is a great idea.
So maybe you're talking
I-
about the process.
Yeah.
More than,
Well,
Well,
The process is
I don't
convoluted,
think we
yeah.
should be as strict as Conway. And I think that maybe there's some things that we could do that are a little bit stricter here. I don't know.
well, I think the
that-
old
But
one
finding a balance.
split it out for this area, this area, this area, this area.
Mhm.
Whereas this one seems to
Lump it all.
lump it all together, so you can read one document and you just have to know what area you're in is, because it spells it out pretty well. Although I don't like the fact that the inspector is the guy that decides whether a tree can stay or go because they're not arborists.
Yeah, and I do think you have to have some level of oversight. I mean, I think there are other people other than an arborist that's qualified to make a determination. But unless the inspector is ISA certified.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. And I think you do have to have a certain amount in there, or because you can't, you only got one chance, and once they're gone, they're gone.
And when you live in an area where the lots are huge,
Mhm.
where they're, several acres, or then it's still important, but not quite as crucial as when what you do, what your neighbor does
Mhm.
directly impacts the value of your home
Mhm.
because of the proximity to
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
neighbor.
your property rights should stop where they impact me.
Right,
And if you're lowering the value of my property by clear cutting, it's just another way of looking at it.
right.
Sure.
Yeah.
And property, like I said earlier, I mean, property, there are studies that have been done repeatedly that trees, having a decent amount of trees on a piece of property increase the value.
But the stormwater issue is one of
That's the biggest one.
ones that we have.
One of
and
my good
should
friends
be
lives in
really
Prestwick.
important.
Yeah, one of my good friends lives in Prestwick, and if you didn't realize this, Deerfield and across 544 into Prestwick was originally like an ocean swamp, and so a lot of that was filled long time ago, and so their lot was in a little corner lot, backed up to other lots, and they were really having trouble after they bought their house with the backyard flooding really badly, and so she called a mutual friend of ours who was a big state arborist. She was over the South Carolina Tree Commission. And you may even seen her on TV if you ever watch ETV. She's hilarious. But she said, plant a river birch. And so they went to Lowe's and got a river birch and came back and planted it. And within 6 months, the flooding issue stopped because the river birch was sucking up so much water. And
But they made that decision on their own. They didn't have the local government say, you have to do this, you have to do this.
no, but if they hadn't cut down so many trees to begin with, they wouldn't have been in that position. And they didn't. The previous homeowner did.
Right.
And that's in unincorporated Horry County too. So you never have as many regulations in the unincorporated areas as
See,
you do in that.
it's possible for you to clear cut your lot to build on it and cause mine to flood.
Yes.
That's the thing.
That's one of the biggest problems.
And
Right.
a lady came into the office today when I was in there working with Tina and said, we're having problems in our backyard, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there going, yes, because somebody built a big duplex that backs up to you and 80% of the lot is covered. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a neighbor who on their own, when they built the house, they planted about 7 trees, probably about, what is that, 1 foot, 12 inches, on their own. They didn't have to have the city come and say, you have to do this.
I
So
have a neighbor.
I guess I'm more on the, it's your property, personal liberty, and, I mean.
You know
of
what I'm
course we
gonna
have
tell you,
to have
though.
Regulation,
If-
but by keeping it simpler and not so much, you have to do this, you have to do that,
It's the tone and the process.
But the difference
and the
is,
content.
the difference is the
and
due
find the
diligence.
balance.
So when if you come to an area, then that's the kind of thing you want to look into. So there are people that move here that choose to live in unincorporated Erie County because they don't want anybody telling them what they have to do.
Sure,
They want to be able to do it the way they want to do
but
it.
that's not the only reason they move to an area.
I
But
have a
if-
neighbor
but if
on the
they-
other hand who is actually sneaking on to undeveloped property next door to him and destroying it. I mean, we've had enforcement involved in that.
Wow.
Not just pay, he doesn't just want to pave his own, he wants to kill, damn raccoons are coming over from that undeveloped area. It's a problem because not everybody thinks like we do, that
Yeah.
we want it to be nice.
When people move into
Sure.
Surfside, the ordinances are already here.
Right.
So they know.
That's why I said
they
due
should
diligence.
know what
Mhm.
they're moving into.
Now, if we change the ordinance, that's a different story.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's some discussion, we've had that discussion a
Well,
good
is this
bit.
changing the ordinance, the new proposal here? It's not really changing it, is it?
Well,
It's
it
just
does
simpler.
change it, but it changes it in different ways. But if we adopted a new ordinance that was stricter, then you could say, well, wait a minute, I bought my house 10 years ago and I like it the way it is, and now
Change
you're
the
changing
rules,
it on
yeah.
me. So, and we had, like I said, we had that discussion with regards to, remember we talked about non-conforming lots? And I said, I can't encourage you to make the lot size bigger because you already got this many that are non-conforming. And it doesn't make sense to keep creating more of a non-conformity. Keep it where it is and live with it. But
We even went so far the last time we had this tree ordinance go round as to think about writing penalties that would be stricter for developers than for Joe homeowner. It's illegal.
Mhm.
Been there, tried that, didn't work. You can't have different penalties for different folks.
yeah,
We thought it was a great idea for a few minutes.
So you want more penalties on.
well, if they
buildings.
do something to violate the ordinance.
When it's deliberate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what we're saying is we know better than a homeowner.
No, I'm talking about developers.
These-
I don't care about
developers
you
or
next
homeowners.
door wanting to cut your
But
branch.
this covers all of
In
that.
some
Yeah.
cases, yes, because an individual homeowner might not understand the stormwater issue. They may not understand the tree city value. So in some cases, yes, and that is why you have a planning commission, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a planning commission to represent everyone, not just those who.
And
Yes, but we
Looking at the
need, to look at the macro, the town as a whole and what is best for the town. That is what is best for me.
Sure.
Or for you,
Right.
or
Correct.
for my neighbor. It needs to be what benefits the entire town, which would be beauty and trees, I think.
with
In
the
your
exception,
opinion.
Yeah, in my opinion.
with the exception of last year, everything I've ever done has been geared towards the public process. So I have always been over backwards to make sure that people know what's going on, whether it was a rezoning or something else. I've even hand-delivered flyers about rezoning applications to neighborhoods that were rental units because I knew they wouldn't get the notification. And I thought they lived there, they should be able to have a say. Because property owners are the only one notified, and a lot of times people are absentee property owners. But anyway, having said that, if any changes are made, we're opening up again. So we advertise it, we post it, we use social media. The changes would be out there, and people would have an opportunity, a public hearing here and a public hearing at town council.
So are you saying that we're planning to make things more strict now?
No, I'm just
Okay.
saying if any changes are
If we
made,
change
if
the
anything
ordinance
is
at all.
amended,
Okay.
we do it, it's
Sure,
It's a
full
public process.
public purview.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So people can be aware. Some people choose not to be aware.
Right.
Now they find out later that something changed. They might be upset, but they had an opportunity to comment. So for me, the key is to make sure it's out there. So I would never try to rush something through.
Right.
And we can definitely say that with the chapter 17 changes we made before, they were not rushed through. Yeah.
All right,
Children were born faster than that.
yeah. Let's go back to this proposed draft. I have a couple of comments.
Okay.
I think the purpose statement is fine. Their policy statement, I cringe a little bit because they're saying it's written to educate members of the community and encourage the permit process. I'm sorry, this isn't an educational pamphlet. This is a law.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a friendly pamphlet.
Right.
So it's inappropriate. I think that's nice, but I think it's inappropriate to say it when we're writing a law. And then the definitions.
I think they're missing a few.
Well, the thing is, there is an entire section on definitions in Chapter 17. It just doesn't happen to be within the tree ordinance.
Well, some of them, when I was going through these, in every case, I'd look at the tree ordinance and I'd go back and look at the
Yeah,
general
I did that
provisions
too.
and read the ordinance too. And there were some cases where they would refer to something and it was not anywhere in the ordinance other than the text that it was in. And I'm like, how do you know what that is?
Yeah.
So if there's anything we need to identify, then we'll make sure it's there.
Do we really need to give a definition for diameter and circumference?
Well,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I think in this case, I don't like it because it's not germane to the trees.
Well, it's almost offensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, you can say what it is,
Yeah.
but that's
needs
too
to be-
general.
Right.
Yeah, I would say, if you're measuring a tree, one of them, literally, it was I'll pull it out and pass it around. I think it was Sullivan's Island, tells you how to measure the trees.
Yeah, well, we went to circumference rather than diameter
Uh-huh.
last go round because not everybody owns a caliper. How do I measure through the middle of a tree? It's a whole lot easier for me to measure around it.
Well, you
It's
can
just
measure
easy.
around it and then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, then
So-
you use your algebra, but I got in big trouble then.
See, measuring your tree. Tree sizes are determined by measuring the number of inches in diameter at breast height. In order to measure the DBH, measure from the ground to a spot 4.5 feet up the tree. Then from that point, wrap the tape measure around the tree to measure the circumference. Finally, take the circumference and divide by pi. Diameter tape measures are sold at most hardware stores.
Isn't it easier to say circumference of 26 inches
See?
and go through all that?
3.1465.
Yeah.
Keep going.
My great nephew in Tennessee got an award at his school because he took pi out 200 places
Oh my God.
by memory.
Oh, my God.
He's a show off.
All right. So anyway, definitions are real. Some of these are in the definitions chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Expected to pose. I'm sorry. That's pitiful. That does not help us at all. Building is defined in 17-007. Structure is defined in 17. So a structural foundation is I'm sorry.
Well, he's a building official.
Yeah, I know. He's looking at it from that perspective. When we get down to exemptions, this is just for the purpose of thinking about it. Electric utilities are exempted from the permitting process, blah, 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 upon notification and approval of the PBZ or designee. Is town approval required for the electric companies to
I didn't
prune?
think it was.
They notify, typically, they come in and say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, well, this
Because-
says approval,
Because,
and I think that's burdensome for our staff.
but in some cases, a lot of it's in the public. See, this is what's in there now. Electric utilities are exempt from permitting process for pruning and or removal of a tree when necessary to correct a hazardous situation or to eliminate tree or wire conflicts that have potential to interfere with power reliability upon notification and approval of the town's code enforcement official. So they just notify when they're coming in.
It hasn't really changed.
Yeah, so that's what's in there.
But what I'm wondering, as long as we're looking at this, isn't it a little burdensome for our planning and zoning people to have to say, okay, you can do what you're going to do?
Well, the biggest reason they do that is when people call and say somebody's out there cutting down all the trees on so-and-so street, then we can say, oh, yeah, that's Santee Cooper.
Yeah.
It's really more of a courtesy than anything.
And then, let's go over to
But
page.
does he have approval or is he just being notified?
He's being notified.
So we ought to scratch through
Do
approval?
you have more, Muriel? Go ahead.
I was going to jump to page
Well,
3.
it says a notification and approval of town's code enforcement official in the original, in the existing.
Okay.
On page 3,
Mhm.
under pruning, number 2, where it says limbs pose or can be expected to pose a hazard to building, property or utilities, and it looks like property is in red, like maybe it's been added. I need to compare.
Well, I wondered that. Let me look at
So,
maintenance strategies.
I don't, property is very, like, open. That's, I mean, somebody could say, oh, those tree roots are, I can't grow any grass right there. It's messing with my property.
Mhm.
I think that's too,
Mhm.
Yeah. Or it's posing a hazard to my lawn chair. I'm sorry. Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Why did he add property?
And I think that's part of, I think I'm sure that he has a good why for a lot of this stuff, and that maybe it would help us to understand some of his why. You know, that we might be able to be more helpful if we could understand some of his why.
I think I could probably get him to explain some of it.
I mean, I certainly want to do what we can to support them, because I know they are working so hard, and they have been understaffed,
Mhm.
and
I sympathize and I want to support them all the
Absolutely.
way, but that sympathy does not go so far as saying you don't have to enforce it.
right.
They did hire a new inspector,
Oh, good.
and he's from Pittsburgh.
Oh,
wow.
those
That's
people
good.
from Pittsburgh,
So
can't
he's
trust them.
been, but he's been
Can't trust
inspecting a whole lot of stuff for a long time. I don't know that he's from Pittsburgh proper, but
I
the area.
lived in Pittsburgh for 2
Yeah.
years.
Well, he's got some decent experience in
Yeah.
the general field. That's good.
He's never had to deal with people walking in and out of the office, Tina said. So he's only been out in the public realm doing the inspection. So he probably comes in the morning, or he might leave from wherever and goes out and does inspections and then comes in and turns in everything.
So he hasn't dealt with all the lunatics in Surfside
So
either.
he's got a little
Hey,
learning
now.
curve.
God help him.
Just on the planning and zoning commission.
Yeah.
Oh, man, you call it lunatic.
I resemble that comment.
Me too.
Hey,
You haven't met any since you've been here?
Oh, yes, ma'am. And I will call it, if you really want me to.
the
Can we
public
just go
speaks.
through this?
Yeah, let's go on through it. Cause I mean,
Paragraph by
we're not going to change anything right out, but
Yeah, and this whole thing too about pruning, but the question I wrote down is in whose opinion? It doesn't say in whose opinion.
yeah.
We'll get over to page 4, down near the bottom, B, the owner building contractor is not required to appear before the BZA. Why? Why is that important? Why shouldn't he be required? So it's another one for whoever wrote it.
Landmark tree would prevent the land from being used either, blah, blah, blah.
What page you say, 4?
Page 4,
This-
towards the bottom, B. They're making a big deal out of the owner, builder, or contractor shall not be required to appear before the BZA. The PVC gives them a release from that. They're excused. They're excusing them from the hearing. And I don't
That's on
understand that.
landmark tree.
If there's going to be
That's
a
if they're
hearing,
going to the BZA, which,
yeah, if there's going to be a hearing, why would you deliberately excuse the owner, builder, or contractor from the hearing? I'm sure there is a reason, but I don't know what it is.
that's what I wanted. Yeah, there's a whole lot that's been taken out, so.
A whole lot.
Landmark, okay.
I-
It's in the existing ordinance. The owner, builder, or contractor shall not be required to appear before the Board of Zoning Appeals.
You're kidding.
And the Director of Planning, Building and Zoning and Code Enforcement shall issue a release excusing the owner, builder, or contractor from the Board of Zoning Appeals hearing.
I think that's part of my problem is that this doesn't indicate what's already in the ordinance and what's being changed.
I think that is a big part of the problem. I think
Yeah.
we need to see,
Well, I went through this and there's a lot of redundancy. And I'm like, why is it repeats itself.
Well, and that was
Redundancy.
one of the complaints is
I
that
agree.
in one area it says something, and then another area it says the same thing,
Mhm.
but then
Yes.
below it they have differing things.
Yeah.
So
It's
like
very
If
redundant.
there's something conflicting though,
that's what I told
then
them. I said we
somebody
can fix
should-
that.
then point that out to us.
Okay.
The redundancy, I
Because I
tried
think the
it.
original was set up by areas that you're working in.
Mhm.
In other words, R1 had a, R1, R2, and I think R3 had a list. Then you got into business areas. And a lot of it said the same thing over and over and over, but it was under different headings.
Right.
This is all under one heading.
I'm in favor of eliminating the redundancy.
Mhm.
Keeping laws simple, I think, is easier to then follow the law,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and people, you know, who's going to read through all this?
I,
And they'll get halfway through and say, oh, God.
I'll tell you, 3 years ago, I was chairing the planning commission, and I was the lone vote against forwarding this thing because I thought it was too darn complicated. It's very, very redundant.
And it
That is
repeats
worth
itself,
nothing,
too.
but I'm just telling you.
It's a joke.
Well, I'll be glad to go through it and see if I can find, what I can do is go through it and highlight and send out things that I think can be removed because they're not taking, or where you can combine sections
Yeah.
or something where, make it clearer. And then I can also show the comparison between what he did and what's in there now. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be
So-
really helpful.
So that's what I can do.
So that we can see the original
Mhm.
state, see what they want the changes to be,
Mhm.
and be able to mull it over that way, I think,
Mhm.
and discuss it that way would be more.
And in all honesty, I don't think they were trying to I don't think they were trying to reduce the tree protection. I think that maybe the more of the issue was the provision for trees in new development.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I don't think they were trying to reduce the tree protection, meaning the trees that are significant landmark, whatever title we use. I don't think they were trying to make it easier for people to cut down trees. I think the question was, how can we not have to provide so much? And the other side of that is my talking to Sammy and Sammy saying, they only have to have 15 inches of trees on the whole lot.
Mhm.
Now that's when you plant them, but you know, it takes a long time for trees to mature. So, you know, if you cut a lot of trees down and you're entitled to, I'm not saying anything wrong with it. I mean, that you're allowed to, then the ones that you put back are this big and you cut one down that was this big, then that's a big change in the
It's
environment.
a net loss, yeah.
Mhm.
And Mary Ellen is right in that if they take out a big tree and put back in a really small one, and then
I've heard that.
after it's done, they can, the ordinance says, oh, well, I can cut this tree because it's small.
Yeah.
And then they take it out. And
Right after inspection, up it comes.
so
We had that Market
That's-
Common, one of the neighborhoods out there, people were cutting down all the trees and I had to go out there and say, this isn't your tree. This isn't the right of way.
Yeah.
This is the
But
city's
even if
tree.
it's on their lot,
Well, they thought it was on their lot.
but even if it
Yeah.
is on their lot, if it was supposed to be there and now, okay, the house is built,
Mhm.
the builder's gone, well, this tree isn't big enough to be protected under the ordinance, so I can take that out now.
Now, anybody who's listening to this, you just gave them an idea.
They already know.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
There are all kinds of
I
things out
did.
there. Mhm. But, so how about, okay, going forward, I mean, I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So going forward, what I'll do is I'm going to take the existing ordinance. I'm going to specifically look for the inconsistencies and try to find, get input from staff and say, okay, what are your complaints? What are the problems that you're having?
We do want to try to
Yeah.
help them.
Yeah.
When they're
Help them.
having problems, not at the expense of, oh, we're going to change the law
Right.
and make
Yeah.
it easier, but if there's something that we can do to make it more simple or
Mhm.
then yes, I think.
Yeah, I want to help staff, and the
Absolutely.
ordinance is very cumbersome, and you're right. They say the same thing in 4 different places,
Well,
but I'm not interested in lowering the requirements.
Not to burst everyone's bubble, but one of the discussions I've had with Mr. Shanahan is the possibility of, because the zoning ordinance is full of inconsistencies. They all are, and I'll tell you why.
They've been patched.
But yeah, like you said, I mean, I think we've talked about that. You keep putting these little, Band-Aids here and here and here. We talked about, what I suggested was, if you were going to go back and overhaul everything, do a unified code so that the zoning and the development regs are in one document, and they're like this, instead of this is one and this is one.
Mhm.
So that could happen in the next year. We could start that process. And if that's the case, then this may be premature.
We're
But
trying
the reason I'm saying that is because, and you live here, you know this, Surfside is 2 square miles. There are not a lot of areas with big raw land where a developer is going to come in and build a subdivision.
no, but he's raping the lots one at a time.
Right. And what unified codes can do is they can put design requirements and landscaping and everything as part of the development approval. So you know what you're going to get. I mean, not to the point where all the houses are going to look just alike or anything like that, but you have certain requirements. So like the things that the overlay does in the commercial area could be spread out,
So at the time you purchase your undeveloped lot, you get a pretty good idea of what's going to be expected. That would be good, wouldn't it? Rather than surprise us when you.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you, without a doubt, I stood in Tina's office for an hour and a half, at least 2 hours, almost 2 hours a day, trying to calculate for someone to put a front porch, an 8x8 addition to their front step with a roof over it, a covered porch, trying to calculate it and make it work with the impervious ratio and the lot coverage. And everybody is trying to squeeze. Now, in that case, I would say he's got too many sheds.
Yes.
So,
That's just me. So so a unified code may be a possibility.
Well, even now we have saying in R3, you gotta have 3 trees. They plant trees, they die. Nobody pays any attention to it. I mean, to me, that makes the code stupid. There ought to be enforcement.
Well, in general, and that's the challenge, is that, and I saw Tina's paperwork for the month of April, how much that went out in permits, or how much came in permits, and development value is incredible. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
big. The challenge is you basically got an inspector. In the towns where they have tree councils or tree boards, one of the requirements that they usually put on the tree board is every year they do a tree inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So they go out and look at everything. And it's hard to establish your baseline for the tree inventory. But after that, it gets easier and easier to say, oh, well, wait a minute. This was a new build this in the last year, and they were required to have 5 trees, and they only have 2. So, I mean.
Well, there's no reason why part of our recommendation, whatever we send forward to town council, that we can't include. And by the way, the ordinance is not the problem. The enforcement is you guys beef up the step.
Yeah, but
Hire some contractors or whatever. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Maybe because I'm German, but to me, this sounds a little bit like a police state. The enforcement of, oh my God, you cut down your tree.
Well, if we're going to have a law, we should enforce it, or we shouldn't have a law.
Well,
Right.
Yeah.
It's like drinking on the beach. It's not illegal because nobody enforces it. Now, if you drink out of a glass container, that's enforced. But if it's out of a cup or out of a can with a koozie around it, nobody enforces it.
We can write laws all day long, but unless there's I mean, Kenny just went through this with the tent ordinance.
I also think, laws are laws. But have you ever seen the Pirates of the Caribbean? He said, the code is more like guidelines. And I think when they're saying encourage the permitting process, it's kind of bringing in the residents in with us and saying, hey, we're all part of this together.
An ordinance is a law.
Yeah.
So that's not the place to
And is
encourage
it
anything.
for the people or the people for the law? That's the question. I
Well,
have.
No.
zoning,
Is this all about?
If we're going to have a
it's
law,
for the
then a
public
law.
good.
It's for the public good.
Yeah, maybe
Yes.
don't have a law.
Yeah, and what is the public good? So that we can enjoy life. And if it's all too much burdensome, if you can't tell, I lean towards freer state,
And we enjoy your.
Yeah.
I do.
Thank you.
That's
When-
it.
I appreciate
When
it.
I worked in Georgetown County, we had a developer that was coming in and building a subdivision off of Highway 701. And I went out there and they were cutting down a lot of trees, a lot of pines. It was a pine forest. I mean, that's what half the timber industry lands have been sold off. And so they're going to build a subdivision, no problem. But when I got out there, there was this monstrous oak right at the entrance point. And I said, okay, no problem cutting the trees. Don't touch the oak. So, and I mean, when I say huge, I'm going to tell you in just a minute how big it was. So about a week later, somebody called me and they said, you need to get out to so-and-so's property. And that's why I said, they're cutting down the oak tree. And I went out there and I took a picture of 5 employees standing across the stump, side by side. That's how big that tree was.
And they've been told.
And they decided that it was just easy, it would be easier to develop with the tree gone. It wasn't in one of the lots. It was in required open space. I was like, you could have used that for your, to sell it, a selling point. I got lambasted on the walk my neck in Pawleys Island because somebody built a development and called it Hidden Oaks. And they said, well, they named it that because they cut them all down and you can't see them anymore.
Hidden.
Yeah,
That's funny.
it's the hypocrisy of it all.
When will Surfside be fully planned out and filled in? I mean,
Well, it's not per se a planned community. So, but I mean,
they're having developments,
Yeah.
I mean, boy.
That's not us.
17. Oh, is that outside?
that's unincorporated Horry County.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that school. Because that
And-
was a heavily wooded.
That-
Yeah.
that's the
Tree
county,
inside.
Okay.
We don't have any residential on the other side of 17.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what
Commercial.
percentage
Right.
are vacant lots, but a few years ago it was only 13%. I know it's a lot less now.
Yeah, they're selling, and people call in and say, how many vacant lots do you have? And I'm like, well, I counted this many, but
Well, what's going to happen, and members of council have talked about it, and Sammy, I think, has mentioned it. We're getting to a stage where it's not going to be developing undeveloped lots. It's going to be tearing down the
That's
old
it.
and building.
We're
Yeah.
there already.
Yeah,
It's a
that-
whole new wave of everything's that's going to be replaced.
and that's what I was talking about with the possibility
Yeah.
of creating,
Well, I can't see.
the possibility of creating some standards or something like that, because if they're tearing down a smaller house on a lot, but they're putting back a monstrous duplex, or they're tearing down a decent sized house and building a mini hotel, then you're getting more and more, it's not,
This changes the
It's
scope
density,
of the way the town
right.
works, and we've got to.
And that's one of the reasons I don't like them using the setback. I understand
Uh-huh.
having to use it for ADA, because you gotta have access to your house, but if you can't have a gas tank because you don't have any property left, I'm sorry, you can't have a fireplace. You made the decision to build from corner to corner, front to back, and you didn't leave any space for amenities. That's your problem. Shouldn't be my problem. I don't want somebody's air conditioner sitting next to me in the setback. It can be wherever
Because
it
they
wants to
didn't
be.
plan well.
They didn't plan properly.
And I think in some cases, I'm not saying that ignorance is bliss, but I mean, in some cases, I think it should be the responsibility that the architect should point certain things out and say, hey, look, but that's what they're doing. And they want full value of their lot. You mean, they see your footprint is this big, I can use all of that property for my house.
Right.
So
Plus, they're operating on the philosophy that they'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission.
absolutely.
Well, now, how do they get around the permeability issue?
What a lot of people are doing now is using pavers instead of concrete.
Okay.
And pavers are still considered permeable, but they're not so much. It's like I found out working in Georgetown County in Merle's Inlet, we were having problems, and somebody said, well, we have oyster shells and coquina for our parking lot. And I said, yeah, but after about a year of cars running over them, it's concrete. I mean, that stuff sets up. You have to go get a drill to get that stuff out of there.
We're giving people ideas. Let's
Mhm.
stop.
And that's one thing I did when I went to Georgetown. We didn't have a stormwater ordinance yet. I may have already told you this because I tell stories all the time. And so the first thing I did was change the parking standards. So instead of minimum parking, it was maximum parking.
Mhm.
So you were allowed this many parking spaces by right. If you wanted more, they had to be pervious. And
I
the
like
first
that.
one we ran up against was the Carrabba's, and they pitched a fit, and they said, we can't operate with only this many parking spaces. And I said, I'm not telling you you can't have more. I'm telling you
They're
you
gonna be
can't
pervious.
pave them.
Mhm.
You know that, or you can pave them with pervious concrete, which still has to be maintained. But now a lot of other places are doing that, so it might have been a good idea.
Any other specific discussion with, we understand now what Carol's gonna go get us a fresh copy so that we can understand what we're looking at. Anything else before we move on the agenda? Anybody? Nobody? All right then, Mr. Public, you have another opportunity to comment.
We'd like to hear them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're going to comment, you need to come to the mic so we get a record of it.
That's fine, I'm fine.
Just like 1 or 2 bullet points, just really quick, please.
I think it's, I'm like you, I think there's too many regulations, too many rules. I do think that needs to be combined down to a smaller amount. I don't think that, after the fact, after these houses have been built, and they came out and said, these trees have got to stay. Well, I have to tell you who I am.
We know who you are.
Right, so I do think that after these houses has been built, these huge, humongous houses has been built, there's nobody coming back and checking whether these things, that these trees are still there. A year after, I ain't calling no names, but a house was built, and some of the trees was had to stay on the lot. That was after a year, they was able to take them trees down, which nobody comes back to check now, so they're gone. They did go through the process of going up and getting permits to get these trees taken down. So there are no, what seems to me needs to be done is the enforcement after the fact. After they tore down these trees or let them get by with not leaving the trees, nobody goes back and checks. And I
And
do
they know
think
that.
that's some of the things that needs to be looked at. But I do agree with you that some of these trees, some of the ordinances for these big trees over your house and all, there ought to be a limitation to, you ought to be able to take some of them trees out if needed to be. If it's damaging your house, cars, them things that you need to look at. I mean, you just don't go say, cut them down, but somebody besides this building inspector, there ought to be a way that if he comes out, his laws ought to be what he can do, what he can come up with and say. But there ought to be a process and then that you can go to somebody else. If he don't agree, go to somebody else till you get to the final person who the arbor necessarily to say whether that tree needs to come down or whether it don't. But there's some things that can be looked at for sure.
Like, I did not know him, or I didn't,
No,
but there are a lot of people who have the same viewpoints. And I think they're very valid points. Thank you for saying.
And believe it or not, when Sammy and I had a discussion one time and he was talking about a lot where they cut it and everything, and I was like, I don't want to be the one to break it to you, but if you like the view across the street, buy it.
Yeah.
And I love trees, don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
But if somebody buys a piece of property and they can leave, like if it's in the footprint where the house is going to go, they can legitimately ask to remove it. You can't make it impossible to build on a lot. There's some places that do, but that's not going to work either. So
You can. I had to buy the lot next to me. It's protected wetlands,
Mhm.
undevelopable, restricted.
Mhm.
But we still bought those lots because we don't trust that they're going
Because
to
you
stay
want,
protected.
honey, I tell you what, since I've been doing this, I have seen so many places that shouldn't have been developed,
Mhm.
developed.
That's why we bought them.
But you're rich, see,
No.
us.
They were
poor
cheap
people.
because they were undevelopable. Yeah.
Where there was too many hindrances. And there are properties like that.
Yeah.
But like, I think I read in one of the ordinances, there was an example of a lot that had so many trees that they basically said it can't be developed. And I think the city made a fair offer to the owner, and so they kept it as a little mini park. So the city's maintaining the trees, everybody loves it. It's like the cornerstone of the neighborhood.
And I
But-
think we can have some common
Mhm.
sense and kind of work, because there's a lot of people
Mhm.
with differing opinions, and let's work together.
Yeah.
Figure it
We
out.
can find the middle ground somewhere.
Right.
Okay, we're at commission comments. Scott, would you like to start?
Why me?
Because you talk so well.
Now
So
I got
articulate.
pressure. So, no, it's great to be with everybody again
Yes.
after, the last little video conference. And it's nice to see people's smiling faces. And I enjoyed this discussion today. And I may have been a little bit dogmatic on one side of it. It's not because I only believe in this. I'm just being like the counterpoint. And so I think it's a great commission, and really thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you.
Thank you. Melly?
I think we had some great discussion, and I agree, Scott. I think as I said before, I appreciate your point of view. I think that it's thought provoking and helps us to think about some different things. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that you are dogmatic about it. And thank you, Mr. Public, for showing up.
Do you own the supermarket?
And Carol, we appreciate all you're doing as
Thank
well.
you.
Yes, thank you.
I think that, are we down one member now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we need the website. There's only 6 people named, that's right, but the lead sentence says there are no vacancies on planning commission.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we want people to send in
It's
their
buried in the
resumes.
text that's wrong
Yeah.
there,
Okay.
because there is a vacancy on the planning commission.
Well, I've enjoyed our discussion. I've been on both sides. I've had to hire an arborist a few times to get things done around my house that were in danger, and I didn't like spending the money, but that was the way it was done then, and I'm not opposed to that. I think it puts a lot of pressure on one individual. He has to go out and decide whether every tree is good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
It really should be up to the homeowner to hire somebody to tell him that it's good or bad, and then he should accept it. So I'm a little more dogmatic than you are, only because I don't think it's right for one person. One person can't, even if it's just 2 people. They're not arborists. They don't know. They're basically hearing what's being said, and they look at it and say, well, maybe. And I'd like to protect our trees. And frankly, at my lot, I got a lot of trees. The trees don't get rid of my water. It just soaks into the sand.
Well, it depends on the type of tree in some situations. So. River birds will suck it up.
Well, I appreciate all the work you do for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I really like this working commission. I wish other public bodies could cooperate and disagree as well as we do.
We're going to disagree.
I'm real happy with us. We need one more member, and then we'll be real good. The only thing I have to say is it's going to be hard. We want to have it both ways. We want everybody to do what they please, but at the same time, we want to protect the beauty and the stormwater issues in our town. And we're going to have to work hard to have it both ways. And I want to remind everybody, too, that page 44 of our comprehensive plan addresses the subject of trees and commits us to certain things. Go read it.
As does Tree City USA.
Yeah, it's online. Thank you, everybody, for a great meeting. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Mr. Public.
Did you have comments?
No, I'm just happy to be here. And I'll say that I will be the devil's advocate sometimes myself, and I'll bring up things that other people won't think of, just to put it out there so that people will think a little more openly. Yeah, like critical thinking. And I agree with you. And the only thing I say is, and I've said this publicly before, I get frustrated. State of South Carolina has very strong limitations on variance, the ability to get a variance.
It's really
And
difficult.
that's what frustrates me, so that this needs to be able to be addressed, because state of South Carolina, if you don't meet the 4 criteria to get a variance, then by law, they shouldn't issue one. But every situation is different, and there's got to be flexibility in there. So, you're creating impossible standards for people to meet. And that's why I was so strongly supportive of the ADA thing. Like, I went out of my way to find a solution for that, because these people were never going to get help. And to think that someone would have to sell their home, you've got a 77-year-old retired Army officer, general, who was going to have to move out of his house because he couldn't get an elevator put in. That's not right.
Yeah.
So while I completely respect the zoning ordinance, I understand that there's got to be some room in there. So.
I love you guys.
Okay,
Hey, I got a question.
Motion
Has
to
nothing
adjourn?
to do with this. Is there a group that works on our ponds?
Oh, I second.
I got to declare it adjourned.
I ran across some information about plants that you can put around the pond to hold the banks.